Welcome to this lesson on chords and cadences. Now we're going to start by going through the scale degrees, which helps us when it comes to identifying chord progressions and also the cadences. So first of all, with scale degrees, we have the tonic, the supertonic, so much like with fonts, superscript means above, Superman is above. So the supertonic is above the tonic. Now the mediant, that's the third above, which is important to think about when it comes to the submediant, which is the sixth. So we have the subdominant and the dominant. Now that's easy to remember because the subdominant is under the dominant, but actually what it means is where the dominant is 5 up, the subdominant is actually 5 down. Much like here with the submediant, because obviously the submediant is not below the mediant. So again, we have to go mediant 3 up, submediant 3 down. And the leading note. All right, so the leading note, as it sounds, functions to lead. So it leads back to the tonic. So when it comes to scale degrees, we can look at chord 1, up to the supertonic, the mediant, the subdominant, and the dominant. Now what you should notice is as we rise towards the dominant, it kind of increases the tension to the highest point at the dominant. So once we get to that 5, it wants to resolve back to 1 with better voice leading. Alright, and if you're confused by the 1-6 or the 6-6-4, then watch my video on chord inversions, which explains figured bass. So getting up to chord 5 is the highest point of tension, and if we continue 6 to the leading note, which is the diminished chord, and back to 1. Chord progressions can be separated into kind of 3 different kind of sections. So we have the tonic chords, the 1, the 3, and the 6, the subdominants, and through to the dominants. Now the arrows relate to kind of this kind of progression, this movement of the chords. So when you go from a tonic chord to a subdominant, it feels like you're on the move, and then once it gets to a dominant, you've reached the highest point of tension, which makes it want to get back to the tonic. Right. From 5, it tends to go to 1 in a perfect cadence, but also it can then head to 3 or 6, which would kind of be an interrupted cadence. So starting with the tonic chords, there are some important things to point out. So if we're in C major, chord 1 would be C, E, G. Chord 3 would be E, G, B. Now notice that I've put 3 and 6 there in the small letters to represent the minor chords, and chord 1 there is a capital I, which is the Roman numeral for a major tonic. Now the thing to notice here is we have the E's and the G's combined in the 1 and 3, and the C and E combined in chord 6. So the colors help to show what notes are shared in these chords. So they're the only chords that have an E in it, but also notice that the 3 and the 6 chords both share 2 notes with the tonic. So for example, if we have chord 6, we have the C and the E that's shared from the tonic, but also if we do a chord 6 in first inversion, so we play an A minor chord with a C on the bass, it very much sounds like a tonic but in its minor form. So chord 3 and chord 6 help to function as tonics but add extra color by being minor chords. So next we can move to the subdominants, and these are chord 2 and 4, and much like the previous one, we can talk about the inversions, which are really relevant. So again in C major, chord 4 will be F major, and chord 2 will be D minor. And again, we share the F's and the A's. So again, if we're in chord 4 in root position, we're going to have an F on the bass. And then if we do chord 2 in first inversion, we're also going to have an F on the bass. So again, it sounds like a chord 4, but in a minor form. So a 2-5-1 with a 2 in first inversion sounds very much like a 4-5-1. And finishing with the dominants. So the 5 and the 7 with the little 0 in superscript is the diminished chord. So chord 5 in C major is G major, and chord 7 is B diminished. Again, we are sharing 2 notes, but if we look at the dominant 7 chord, which is the most common 7 chord, we add an F, and then we're sharing all 3 of the diminished. So as you can see in chord 5 and chord 7, we have 2 of the notes being shared. So we have the B and the D both being shared. So really, the 7 chord is actually functioning like a 5-7. So the leading note 7 chord. So the scale degree 7, don't get that confused with a 7th chord. So the 5-7 is really just the leading note chord without the dominant, without the G. So when we have a chord 5 or 5-7, we have 2 instances of semitone resolution. So the 7th of a chord wants to resolve down, and the leading note of a scale wants to resolve to the tonic. So there we have both of those happening. So we have 2 points of tension and 2 points of resolution. So the semitone resolution is what creates that really good finished sound. So in a G7 chord, we keep the G and we have those 2 resolutions. So the diminished 7 chord really functions as a dominant 7 that's missing the root of the chord. So there are 4 main cadences, and I'll use the terms that will come up in NCA. So the perfect cadence is 5-1, again the dominant to tonic, the 2 most important chords. The imperfect is anything to a 5, so you're ending on a 5. And this creates a kind of almost like a question. So we have cadences when we talk. So a 5-1 sounds like a full stop, whereas an imperfect cadence kind of leaves it hanging. So it's kind of like when you ask a question. So when we say, did you learn anything about cadences? We have that rise. And then you could say, I learned all 4 of the cadences and I've got it sussed. Right? So the cadence of my speaking, it rounds off with the full stop. Now the plagal, also known as the amen cadence, is a 4-1. And the interrupted, as mentioned before, is a 5 to something else. Most commonly, we're going to find a 5-6, and that kind of just keeps the sentence going. But again, you could go to a chord 3 as well, which is kind of back to a tonic type chord. So the perfect cadence is the strongest of the cadences and is what's going to be likely to finish a piece or to finish a section. And the imperfect, plagal, and interrupted cadences help keep interest and flow and kind of continue ideas. If we just have perfect cadences, it becomes like someone who speaks in short sentences. So it could sound an equivalent like, I went to the shop, I bought a pie, I ate the pie, I had no money left, I asked mum for money, I went back to town, I bought another pie, I ate the pie. Right? Other than being a terrible narrative, it's just constantly short sentences with full stops. So as we start adding interest and commas and independent clauses, just as we do in English, to make our writing more interesting, we can use different cadences to to create a more interesting kind of musical sentence. So the perfect cadence is a 5, 2, 1. Right, this is the full stop. It sounds finished, it sounds done. Whereas a plagal cadence or an amen cadence sounds a bit different. We have this. So the other two cadences we have are the imperfect, finishing on a 5. It's kind of like the question. So would you like to go to the movies? It kind of sets up that it doesn't sound finished. You know there's something else to come, which would be the response. So an imperfect cadence would be 1, 2, 5. Or anything 4 to 5. So anything it just leaves it hanging. And that's a good way to continue a musical idea. If we only ever do perfect cadences, it's going to sound like short sentences with full stops over and over and over again. So just as we do with our English writing, we wouldn't write like, I went to the shop, I bought a pie, the pie was hot, I blew on the pie, I ate the pie, I got more money, and went and bought another pie. Right? It gets really, really repetitive. So we want to add commas and independent clauses in our writing to set up a different kind of flow, just as we want to do with music. So by creating imperfect cadences, interrupted cadences, we're kind of setting up ideas differently. We can take our time differently and kind of vary where the full stops are kind of landing. So to play through a quick passage of a chord progression and using an interrupted cadence, so we could go 5, 1, perfect cadence, 6, setting up for the perfect cadence, but then ending with a weaker perfect cadence. Right, so it just allows the kind of ideas to keep going. So to recap, we have our 5, 1 perfect cadence, our amen cadence or plagal cadence, 4, 1. We have our imperfect cadence, for example, 1 to 5. Or we have our interrupted cadence, which is a 5 to something like a 6. So there are just 4 cadences for you guys to worry about. It's not too much to ask. Perfect, imperfect, plagal, and interrupted. I hope this was helpful.